Production of the City Club Forum is provided by Nordson Corporation, a world leader in systems that apply adhesives, sealants, and coatings during manufacturing operations to make today's products work better and last longer. Additional support is provided by the Nord Family Foundation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Friday forum of the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Tony Peebles, President of the City Club Board of Trustees. Today we have a program which is in keeping with the City Club's one of our goals to introduce new generations to the public discourse and civic responsibility. There are many so-called experts today that say many Generation Yers, that is those members of the society that are under 30 are disengaged from the public discourse while pursuing .com dreams of internet millions. Many pundits will say that MTV and the internet have young people not participating in the political process. So today at the Citadel Free Speech, we welcome to our podium a member of Generation Y who is engaging the public political process. He's going against the conventional wisdom and pursuing politics at a high level. Mr. John Cranley is a candidate for a seat in the United States Congress to represent Ohio's 1st District, which encompasses Cincinnati's west side and the western suburbs of Cincinnati. Mr. Cranley is a Democrat who is facing a three-term Republican incumbent. John Cranley is a 1992 graduate of St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. He graduated from Cleveland's own John Carroll University, magna cum laude, with a double major in philosophy and political science. Our speaker went on to attend the Harvard University Law School and recently completed his divinity degree from the Harvard Divinity School. Mr. Cranley is a member of the Generation Y, there's a number of people in his age group that are making incredible runs for the Congress. Whether debating education, health care, taxes, or Social Security, Mr. Cranley is speaking out as a member of a new generation that will inherit the responsibility of charting the future course of our country. He has been featured in a documentary on MTV, or Music Television, and has been profiled by George Magazine. At the age of 26, he is the youngest Democratic candidate in the nation running for Congress. Please welcome to the City Club podium, congressional candidate for Ohio's 1st District, Mr. John Cranley.
Thank you very much for having me here at the City Club. And I want to take just a second to thank David and Lee Warshawski for hosting this lunch and for having me here. It means the world. I'm here to explain why someone from my generation, often derisively labeled, whether it's Generation X or Generation Y, I don't know when they switched. They didn't ask me. Why someone from my generation would go into public service, run for office, and in my case, and as the media and studies demonstrate time and time again, that my generation were accused of being the most cynical and skeptical of government that's ever been known. Why would anyone do this? I suggest to all of you that the conventional view of my generation misses the boat. While it is true that many in my generation are distrustful of politicians and government, I do not believe that my generation distrusts the possibility that we can work together to contribute to a better society. I would suggest that no generation before mine has ever clocked the number of hours and the number of experiences doing community service and community outreach. Almost no grade school, high school, or college in the country now allows students to graduate without spending some time helping others, whether it's in a soup kitchen or whether it's doing a big buddy program or a tutoring program, spending time to see how the other half lives. Just as all of you joined the City Club or other civic organizations or religious organizations to make a specific contribution to public life, my generation was raised with these types of experiences that teach us that it is us, rather than the politicians, that make the difference. We see our work ever so slowly building the confidence of our neighbors. Therefore, there is less of a need to place our faith in a hero figure, like a knight in shining armor politician. We have no need for that because we have ourselves. Moreover, by contributing to society ourselves, we live out the true meaning of the democratic ideal, which is to govern our own lives. Thus, while it may be true that we are distrustful of the politicians, we have an inherent belief, in fact, live out our lives in a democratic way, in a democratic process. Pervasive distrust of our politicians is bad for a number of reasons, but I do not believe it threatens the fundamental chords of democracy. To explain these ideas further, I will provide a case study, basically myself, and explain how you do have to have some ego to go into politics, I think. Explain how my experience is family, religious, service, academic, and work, and to show how these experiences led me to a commitment to public service, manifested now by running for Congress. I grew up on the west side of Cincinnati in a neighborhood called Price Hill and attended St. William's Grade School. Through the influence of my parents and grandparents, religion in particular and academics were extremely important to me at a young age. I remember my father telling me any number of times that if you work hard, you will have the freedom to do anything you want in America. This motivational advice had two effects. One, it instilled a deep love for my country and its freedoms and its possibilities. And two, it inspired an ongoing and never-ending crisis about figuring out exactly what it is I wanted to do. It is figuring out this second part that I and I believe in our generation will inevitably draw upon our community and religious and family experiences for guidance. For me, a product of the 1980s culture of family ties, where Alex B. Keaton and his dreams of being a New York banker was my original inspiration, my life changed dramatically at St. Xavier High. Oh, by the way, I went to St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. Some of you may have gone to St. Ignatius in Cleveland. Just to give you an idea of what St. X is like, it's the superior equivalent in Cincinnati. My life changed dramatically when I was at St. X High School, when I acted in a play about the Archbishop of El Salvador, Oscar Romero. We were doing a play written by an El Salvadoran playwright. The guy's name is Nicholas Patricia, I think is the playwright's name, written called The Fifth Son. And it was a play that weaved together cultural and mythical references of El Salvador and basically talked about the passion of Romero's life, his sort of being appointed as a fairly conservative bishop, being converted by the experiences of exploitation of his countrymen, and then him speaking out on behalf of the poor and then being murdered by the death squads. So it's sort of a passion narrative in a Jesuit high school. It's a really heavy play to be doing in a high school setting. I was just in the company. I was a peasant who was killed 3 times. I had blood packets, got to play dead on stage. And being at St. X, like Ignatius, being an all-boys Catholic high school, it was a lot of the reason was to be with the girls that were coming in from St. Ursula and Ursuline Academy, which are the girl high schools. So this was sort of a heady play to be involved with anyway, and the message of it was sort of jolting to my worldview. But then it all came to a crescendo on November 16th, 1989, which just by some unbelievable coincidence was the 3rd day of our show, when the death squads went back into the Central American University at San Salvador, murdered 6 Jesuit priests and the cook and the cook's daughter. I know that Cleveland may have a lot of connection to this event because Gene Donovan was also murdered in 1980, very similar to the way Romero was killed and the Jesuits in 89. So doing the play the same day, the surreal experience of pretending to be shot and killed within hours of people literally paying that price had just an enormous impact on my worldview and sort of led me to believe that I had to have the balance of my life going to public service and giving back and being willing to stand up and say that some things are unjust in society and that we should do something about them. So that for me was the sort of the ignition that said, hey, wait a minute, the world is bigger than sort of than living in the suburbs and being nice. These are things that I still want to do and hope to do, but that we need to have a more holistic approach that combines public service with private ambition. And I remember at the play, Father Ferroni, who was a Jesuit at our high schools, told us that although God does not plan or hope for suffering, never doubt that we have been exposed to particular suffering for a reason. The reason, of course, is a way to serve better, to give back more, and to take care of our brothers and sisters, I think. So the following summer, I went to the Dominican Republic to work with malnourished children. I went with the Jesuits. At the time, I was thinking very strongly about becoming a Jesuit priest, and did all sorts of community service stuff. And I went to John Carroll University in large part because I was still considering a vocation to the Society of Jesus and wanted to explore those thoughts further. Sorry, Father, to the fathers in the audience, but decided not to become a Jesuit, in large part because I do hope to get married and have children someday. But nonetheless, it was certainly a big part of why I chose a Jesuit university. In the meantime, I did pretty well in college and was elected student body president. I was lucky and very blessed to be able to go to Harvard Law School. One year at Harvard Law School, which has been written about and movies have been made about it and books have been written about it, it can be overwhelming. And in some ways, it's intoxicating because of the amazing opportunities of money and travel and status that the degree provides. It is easy, I think, to get lost and sidetracked from a balance in life between work, family, community service, and happiness. And when I got there and realized the doors that were opening because I was going to get this degree, I knew that I needed to take a step back and make sure that I was still firmly planted in a commitment to public service and to social justice. And so during my first year, I volunteered as a lawyer for the poor and ended up in an interesting case that I'll share, an anecdote. I represented a family of a 15-year-old boy who was facing eviction from public housing in South Boston, and Southie as it is affectionately known. And the Boston Housing Authority, the BHA, was moving to evict the entire family of this single mother with 5 kids who had no place to go because he was accused of Saturday night of saying some bad things and throwing some pebbles at this woman's door. I mean, no one in any way, shape, or form was injured, but the accusations were 4 kids basically acting like punks on a Saturday night. And I'll be the first to admit that the 15-year-old boy who I was representing was no angel. The facts that we had presented a foolproof evidence that he was innocent of this particular accusation. Moreover, he had at the time over a year and a half of counseling, and he was really he had stolen a bike a couple of years earlier, and he had been in some trouble, but he had showed no signs of troublemaking in over a year and a half. And anyway, we won't go into all the details of the evidence, but we had a very substantive case that he wasn't in fact there at the time of the incident. Nevertheless, despite the evidence, which we had a ticket timed and dated of him at a movie theater at the exact time of the incident, and we had witnesses who testified that the police had said that it was time to get Tommy out of the neighborhood and they were going to evict his family regardless of the fact that the witnesses were saying he wasn't there. The BHA decided to move to evict the family based on his reputation anyway. And because it was just an administrative hearing and not a court hearing, there were very few due process protections. And faced with this prospect and knowing the consequences, 2 nights before the hearing, Tommy, the 15-year-old, killed himself, hung himself, which ironically had the effect of saving the family home. Making the classic first-time lawyer mistake of getting emotionally involved with my client, I was devastated and disillusioned with the way that my government was treating its citizens and families. And in part, one of the reasons I'm in public service is because I think people should have better choices between despair and homelessness. Once again, I felt I needed a bigger framework. I decided to go to Harvard Divinity School to reach down again into the pool of my religion and to remind myself why public service is important, while difficult and often heartbreaking. Despite the cynicism and skepticism of that experience, I maintained hope and the optimism that in America anything was still possible. So I kept working, graduated from Harvard Law School, accepted a job at a law firm in Cincinnati, planning to have a career balance between the public and the private sectors. Burned by some of these experiences and tempered by the reality that human problems are complex, my zealousness for public service had toned down, but as always, experiences intervened to prevent my resignation from persisting. I was lucky enough to give the graduation speech for my class at Harvard Law School. After the exams, but before the graduation, I visited my college friend who went to John Carroll University, Eric, who now works for a nonprofit school for disadvantaged children in the Bronx. That day that I went to visit him, I met sixth grader changed the name, but his name is Julio, who was born HIV positive, both of his parents having died of AIDS before he was 1 year old. When Julio saw us, he ran over and gave Eric a hug, and we got introduced. He was a really nice kid, the kind of kid who just said hi and was just apparently really popular. And he had not been told that he was HIV positive. Very, very sad story. And while we were in class that day, Julio collapsed, which apparently he does from time to time, and had to be rushed to the doctor. This kind of thing happened to him all the time. And as I sort of saw this wonderful kid go through this experience, and it was part of the day of this school, as we were leaving, I was overwhelmed by Julio's capacity for love and happiness despite his endurance for pain. And I was struck by a sign hanging on the outside of the storefront of this school with the words of Margaret Mead, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I remember thinking to myself that if people like Julio, the 6-year-old, believe such notions, who was I to doubt his wisdom? I wondered whether after all the fantastic tests I had passed, if I was anywhere nearer as an individual to the goodness in Julio, or closer to using my many skills and degrees to make this kid's life less miserable. I remember that I went to law school to do just that. One of the most important and troubling lessons we learned in law school had to do with the allocative efficiency of time, resource, and money. The illustration of the concept in my class was as follows. Spending an hour in a soup kitchen is an inefficient donation because it costs $10 an hour to pay someone to work there, while most of us, being graduates from Harvard Law School, can earn well over $150 an hour for our time. Ergo, rather than spending time in the soup kitchen, we should work the extra hour and then give our extra money to the soup kitchen, thereby maximizing the allocative efficiency of talents and resources. Well, I bet that would be great advice if we didn't have a civic duty to know our fellow citizens, nor a humanitarian duty to take personal care of the poor. That would be great advice if real charity did not mean that when we spend time helping others, we are helped in return. It is foolish to think that we will work the extra hour if we never know anybody in need, nor are we likely to feel we belong to a democratic society if we spend all of our time insulated from the Julios of the world. Of course, the concept makes great economic sense. The point is that we should work the extra hour and go to the soup kitchen. By doing both, we pay off our economic obligations as well as fulfill our own personal human needs. While specialization and the division of labor are important elements of a modern economy, integration is an essential element of human goodness, happiness, and I believe it's an essential element of a Republican form of government. I am not saying only that Julio needs our help, but that we need his too. As President Kennedy said, if a free society cannot help the many that are poor, it cannot save the few that are rich. And so while many critics have foreclosed on our generation's ability to respond to the world's cynicism with love, today I am not afraid of any cynic or any critic because I know that at the very least that this generation will bring to the fore the kind of civic commitments, as you all have, that will show by example rather than by word that we care for each other. We have learned our lessons well. The current lack of leadership on a national level will soon be remedied by our commitments on the local level. I bet that the greatest expression of freedom is commitment, and that in 50 years, our proudest boast will be that in the midst of our great affluence, we found time for those who have little influence. I know this because I see how happy you are, and know that you have all made these very same bets. My life is very good, and it's been filled with many blessings. But like you, I am called to public service because I always think that while we can rejoice in a certainty that today we are part of a community of a surplus of love, let us not forget that Julio and many others have not yet received their personal invitations to this celebration. The fact that integrity and integration have the same root is no coincidence. They are symbiotic. If we fail to share in the pains of our fellow human beings, we will also miss out on a greater love that human interdependence provides. So it is with pride that I say that the time has come for my generation to emerge out of the incubator of your idealism and create a world that will make our own children proud. Then together, we can create relationships committed to those higher goods of love and justice. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to Mr. John Cranley, congressional candidate for Ohio's 1st District and the youngest Democratic candidate in the country running for Congress. We will return to Mr. Cranley in a few minutes for our traditional City Club questions and answers, but first a few announcements. We'll welcome you to this City Club Friday Forum, the longest continuously running free speech forum in the country. Our greetings go to those present in this room, to those watching on WVIZ, PBS Channel 25 and Cablevision, and those listening on WCLV 95.5 FM, or one of several hundred radio stations in the City Club broadcast network. Information about upcoming programs is now available on the internet. There are several ways to reach us. The City Club homepage is cityclub.org, and you can also find us at cleveland.com or WCLV.com. Next Friday, September 15th, we will welcome to the podium John Green, the distinguished director of the Bliss Institute of Applied Politics, discussing the strategy he thinks each of the political parties will use in their quest for the White House and the amounts of money they will spend to get there. We will then have a special midweek forum on Wednesday, September 20th with Dr. John Heglin, the National Law Reform USA Party candidate for president. The following Friday, September 22nd, we will have 2 Friday forums, a special breakfast forum with the Secretary of Labor, the Honorable Alexis Herman, and then at noon, Jim Wallace, editor of Sojourners Magazine and director of Call to Renewal. As you may have heard or read, the City Club is sponsoring a fall series of 4 programs called Redeveloping Cleveland, that will cover Euclid Avenue, the waterfront, the convention center, and the airport. These panels are outstanding, the issues are important, and with the sponsorship of Huntington Bank, Cranes Cleveland Business, Cablevision, and WCPN, this series will get quite a lot of community exposure. The first program on Euclid Avenue is next Wednesday, September 13th. I would like to call your attention to the flyers on your tables and think you will be very impressed with the participants and hope you can attend one or all of these exciting programs. For more information about the City Club, or to order a tape of today's program, or make reservations for upcoming programs, please give us a call at 1-888-223-6786 or at 216-621-0082. As you are aware, the City Club has recently undergone a complete renovation, and we are speaking to you from our beautiful new high-tech facility, which is available for your meeting, luncheon, social event, or conference. Again, you can call us at 216-621-0082 for more information. Today's forum is the annual forum in the memory of David Warshawski in recognition of a generous gift to the City Club Forum Foundation by the Warshawski family. David Warshawski was the treasurer of the City Club during the Depression, and it was under his financial guidance during those difficult years that enabled the City Club to survive when many other organizations, such as our organization, did not. So that we can now claim, as we do each week, that we are the longest continuously running free speech forum in the country. Joining us at the head table are David Warshawski Jr. and his wife Lee, David and Lee, please stand and accept our. We are pleased to have with us today tables hosted by John Carroll University, Jonathan Soros, Joe Simperman, and Calfee Halter and Griswold. Welcome to the City Club. Now we would like to return to Mr. Cranley for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Jim Foster holds the microphone on my left, and Elaine Yite holds the microphone on my right. First question, please.
Mr. Cranley, I was so impressed by your speech, and I was going to ask a question about your political ideas. Instead, my question is, do you hope to defeat the man that is running against you, who is a 4-time congressman?
3 times.
And what are your chances?
Yeah, we're definitely going to win the race. Just to give you a thumbnail sketch of why we're going to win, this gets away from sort of the rhetoric and more into the strategy. The district that I'm running in is the city of Cincinnati, 85% of the city, which is heavily Democratic, and the western suburbs, which are much more Republican. Bill Clinton, who is not particularly popular in Hamilton County, won this congressional district in '92 and '96. The district itself is a third African American, and I believe it's the largest minority congressional district in the country not held by a Democrat. Steve Shabbat, my opponent, has won. He won it with the Gingrich Revolution in '94, so he kind of got in a year that was really bad for Democrats. And he won in '94, '96, and '98 by a very slim margin, even the slimmest being in '98. And he did so by winning the western suburbs by a ratio of 4-to-1. These western suburbs, which are heavily Catholic, very much like the western suburbs of Cleveland. And I come from those suburbs, and my family's been there for 4 generations. And as a Democrat, I'm probably going to lose those suburbs, but I'm not going to lose them 4-to-1. And if I lose them 2.5 or 3-to-1, we'll win. So, assuming we have enough money, and you're more than welcome to make a contribution, to get our message out, I'm confident, and our polling demonstrates that it's just a matter of getting our message out. And luckily, we've been very successful in raising money, and we continue to do so. And so I'm convinced we will win.
Mr. Cranley, I'd be interested in knowing what you will do legislatively if you are elected, and I hope you are, and also to share with us how good a mental digestive tract you have for the compromises that are necessary to do anything in politics.
Thanks for your question. I think the first thing I want to be associated with is campaign finance reform. Having as a first-time candidate running for an office like this, where you need over $500,000, and knowing that 90% of my time is spent raising or thinking about raising money, the system is definitely corrupted by the influence of money. I think McCain was absolutely right about this. You see yourselves all the time, sort of constantly checking that moral compass, and where are you, and what compromises are you going to make just to raise money, let alone what are you going to do once you're in office. So I think the first thing we need to do to reinvigorate democracy and to give everybody a voice is to really, despite the polls showing that it doesn't have traction, to say if we're really serious about reforming our democracy, we've got to be serious about campaign finance reform. Thanks. The second and third things that are immediate are prescription drug benefits for seniors. This is sort of the everyday politics that is pretty much the same across the country. And right now we have a crisis because people who plan to live on a fixed income of their Social Security and their pension are now faced with a different health care system with different expenses. Both parties have agreed to basically put aside between $250 to $300 billion on prescription drugs. And so the question just remains, how do you do it? How do you reach the most amount of need? I believe that what the Democrats have proposed is wiser as opposed to my opponent. So those would be the first couple of things that I think once elected we'll immediately try to do, especially on sort of try to get out there in front and join the forces that have already sort of made a dent in progress of campaign finance reform. And in terms of the compromise, I think it's a great point. I don't know how to respond to it other than to say that when elected, I'll only be one of 435. and there's definitely a necessity to compromise and work with others, and to stay true to core principles, and figure out that little progress is better than no progress.
We like to hold people's feet to the fire.
All right.
Yes, campaign finance reform, what does it mean? It is a wondrously happy phrase,
Right.
but my general sense of what has happened is that every time you staunch the flow of political money into one piece of the political process, it simply finds its way in on another channel, in part because really the task at hand is an enormously expensive one. If you think of 250 million people picking a leader, if you spend $125 million on the presidential campaigns, that's only 50 cents a person. So a lot of money has to flow into the process if it's going to be truly a communicative process. How are you going to keep that huge flow of money in and yet in some way achieve campaign finance reform? What does it mean?
I think that's an excellent question, and it raises not only the sort of questions of what he proposed, but also you're forced to deal with some of the constitutional issues too, of free speech, and at what limit can you limit contributions, and if so, how, et cetera, et cetera. I think that there needs to be a 2 or 3 pronged approach to substantive campaign finance reform. One is, this is sort of something that maybe I differ a little bit with my fellow Democrats on, is I believe that they should, at a first step, adjust the maximum individual contribution limit from $1,000, which was set in 1974. It should be at least adjusted upwards for inflation. If I could raise $5,000 per person, let's say, I'd probably be finished fundraising, and I could focus. But now I'm still going to spend 90% of my time between now and Election Day fundraising. The second part of it is sort of the threshold question, which is it costs an enormous amount of money, and to have an effect at a race as big as Congress, you need a certain amount of money to be on TV for a certain amount of time. So I think that the real question we have to ask ourselves as a society is, what is the threshold? At what level do you need to raise $100,000, $200,000, $350,000 before you've sort of made that sort of benchmark that you shouldn't then spend the last 4 months of your campaign spending all your time fundraising? And so I would be in favor of free TV time. I think in the end is going to have to be the way, because it's, if you think about it, our ideal budget would be, say $750,000 for my campaign. A full $500,000 of that would go straight to TV. And in raising $250,000, I know is extremely difficult to do. And so once, I wonder sometimes when it took so long to get to 250 and I have to keep putting all that time there, and so does my opponent and everybody else in the process. My solution would be raise the individual contribution limit, ban soft money, have more disclosure laws, and in the end, I think that you need to have free TV time for candidates that meet a particular threshold. So the real question, I think, is defining that initial threshold and saying, where do you sort of prove yourself as a credible candidate, and then from there allow people to have some sort of equal free. And it'll be an opt-in system, right? You'll get the free TV time if you accept voluntary spending limits. And I also think it's fair to say that this threshold question, I think, the more as my own positions on campaign finance have changed dramatically going through the process myself and seeing the sort of, I used to always be in favor of very strict and tight contribution limits per individual. I thought the $1,000 was the right way to go, but when you're trying to raise the amount of money we're trying to raise, if it forces you then to spend time trying to just meet thousands of people that can give you money and not worrying about voters because of the massive amounts you got to raise. But defining that threshold, I also believe, sort of the Edsel proposition that after a certain amount of money, the marginal dollar that you're spending on a particular campaign is not valuable. That in my market, I would suggest in Cincinnati, with the media market as it is, and it'd be different regionally, obviously, based on the cost of TV. I would say in my district, any dollar over $1 million is probably a dollar wasted or isn't going to get you a marginal voter. So I don't think it's a problem of anyone having too much money. I think after you flood the market, saturate the market, you've done all you could. And I don't believe that that's going to, you know, to that extent, I think that what's important is getting candidates who are legitimate candidates, you know, that should have a real chance and should be heard. And how you define that, of course, is difficult. And then you have the voluntary opt-in. So I think it's hitting that initial threshold and then providing the forum for candidates to compete.
Mr. Cranley, you mentioned several times Cincinnati, and of course you've lived in Cincinnati most of your life.
Right.
I'd like to ask you a question about Cincinnati.
Okay.
For one reason or another, Cincinnati has obtained the sobriquet of being a very puritanical type of city. I'm not sure how that came about, whether it involved the dispute over the Contemporary Museum several years ago or other issues. First of all, do you think that that nickname is correct? Is it really a puritanical city? And if so, is it still that way? And how did it come about?
Well, I think that, you know, the immigration patterns to Cincinnati had a large number of Catholic and Irish and Italian and German. Basically, you had three major immigration patterns. You had the German, Irish, Italian, Catholic immigration pattern. Then you had a lot of Eastern European Jewish immigration, and as you may or may not know, Reformed Judaism was founded in Cincinnati. And then you had after the Civil War, you had a major immigration from the South of African Americans into the city. I think that in terms of the sort of puritanical and conservative cultural reputation that Cincinnati has, it is definitely a very religious community that takes Catholicism and Judaism very seriously, and in the black community, Baptist churches in particular are very powerful and have a pervasive influence on the mind. I also think that, like any city, you know, and sort of using the Catholic analogy, that we also create a lot of reasons to go to confession too. I mean, I think that it, you know, we set the bar pretty high, and I'm not sure if any of us live up to it. But you know, we have been marred by some of these sort of more national scandals, whether it's extremely inappropriate statements from the former owners of the Reds, or whether it's the Mapplethorpe shutdown at the art museum. I think that like any city, we have a lot of we have a disproportionately high number of loud voices. That Simon Lease, in particular, who's been a sheriff for 30 years, is sort of extremely strict in enforcing the anti-obscenity laws, and was the guy responsible for shutting down the Contemporary Art Museum 10 years ago. And I think that most of us that are in Cincinnati and proud of our arts, proud of our symphony, and proud of our not only our art museum but also the Contemporary Art Museum, are glad that those days have passed, and that nothing like that has flared up again recently. But I certainly believe that there's a lot of truth to the sort of cultural conservatism of Cincinnati. There's definitely sort of very old-fashioned and good family value orientation. And I think, you know, as much as I enjoy going to Manhattan and to Times Square and to places like that, it's nice to grow up in a town where there's no strip clubs in Cincinnati. There's no public nudity. And you don't see any of that stuff as a kid, and I think there's a lot of value to that. So I think there's a lot of cultural pride comes from sort of enforcing a pretty high standard.
Good luck to you, John.
Thank you.
Young people are notorious non-voters. Mm-hmm. That's on record. Are you speaking to youth groups? Are you speaking on campuses? What kind of a reaction are you getting? Are they joining your organization? Do you think they will be moved to vote in the next election?
Well, I certainly hope so, and I believe that we're making every conceivable effort to reach out. Most days now, especially now that the school year has started, is I'm speaking either at one of the high schools or the college, Xavier University or UC in Cincinnati. We've had an extraordinary luck with getting young volunteers on board, high school students in particular. Now, I'd like to believe it's because of me, but it's probably because MTV is following me around. And just a couple of days ago, we switched gears a little bit and I gave a speech to 125 7th and 8th graders. Now, I think there's some sort of point between 7th and 8th grade and high school seniors that I think that I did very well, I think, with the high school seniors, and I think I bored to tears the 7th and 8th graders. They sort of had this homework assignment to come in with serious questions. And so they came in with these phenomenal questions. What are you going to do with Social Security? What are you going to do with Medicare? What are you going to do with, retirement? What are you going to do about the missile defense, system? And I mean, all the major questions, but I don't think they were actually listening to the. I think they were sort of they were getting credit for going home and coming in with the questions. So and stupidly, I answered all the questions, and I think I really bored them, pretty much. So I think that for me anyway, I've had better luck with high school seniors than with 8th graders.
How about college students?
Well, we've got the college Democrats, it's at Xavier University. There's an active group called it's a Program for Peace and Justice that's really active, and they've been very good at getting us volunteers. And we're going to be speaking at both universities in the next couple of weeks in a couple of different fora.
Mr. John Cranley,
Yes.
Your presentation has been refreshing.
Thank you.
I have a very, very simple question, and I hope you can elaborate on it. How can we clone you?
Well, it would be helpful to me because we have every weekend in Cincinnati we have at least 3 or 4 different church festivals, most often Catholic church festivals, and often wish I can be in 2 places at one time. So it would be nice if we could figure that out.
John, I want to ask you to what degree, if at all, you encountered sort of a wait your turn attitude from either your own party or the media, and sort of how you respond to something, somebody says, hey, John, you're 26, run for city council before the Congress, and if you've encountered that at all.
Well, it's odd. I sort of expected to encounter a whole bunch of that. In fact, I argued vociferously against my candidacy when they came to me. I was still finishing up at Divinity School when they asked me to run, and what happened was I had called and said, hey, look, I'm graduating from Divinity School. I'm starting at this law firm in the fall, but I've got the summer off, and I want to get my feet wet in Democratic politics. Why don't I manage? I said, who's going to run for Congress? Why don't I manage that race or something like that? And they said, well, why don't you run? And so it was sort of, it really came out of nowhere. And I'm very glad it did, but I haven't encountered too much of that because they sort of asked me to run,
Mr. Cranley, in your answers, you mentioned the prescription drug program that is going about now. My question is, why can't the candidates, both of them, realize that these $4,000 and $6,000 deductibles will probably never do any of them any good? What they should have is a copay. Some of the HMOs have that today. I think that should be strengthened, or something like that for the rest.
Well, I think that I think on the prescription drug coverage in general, then I'll get more specific about how to address it concretely, is first, like I was mentioning, I touched upon briefly, is that we totally have a different healthcare system now than we did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you went to the hospital, you had an operation, you either died or you were better and you went home. And that was it. And so if you were planning your retirement and you're retired now and you did the right things, you made the sacrifices that were necessary, and you planned a savings account, you planned to live on your Social Security and on your pension, and you knew you'd be on a fixed income, but you were trying to foresee the sorts of things that you would need medically, you would never have predicted the skyrocketing price of prescription drugs, nor in a good way had you predicted the advances in technology that make prescription drugs more necessary to healthcare than, say, hospital visits were 20 years ago. So I think that the first thing is that and this is, I think, the challenge of government, and will always be a slow process for government because of the inherent bureaucratic slowness and nature of bureaucracies. Being redundant here, but it's a good sort of description of what's going to happen, I think. We have to adjust to the new healthcare system that we have now. And I think that, at least in the short term, it's fundamentally critical that the prescription drug benefit that both parties are talking about not only is there, like you said, the deductibles that will be high, but in addition, one will go straight to the HMOs, which will basically subsidize the HMOs, which is a plan that I'm strongly opposed to, or one goes to the Medicare system. And I believe that the prescription drug benefit should go through the Medicare system, not because Medicare is a perfect system, but because it works. And in the other plan, the one that subsidizes the HMOs, the same HMOs that just, from our perspective in Cincinnati, just dropped 27,000 Cincinnatians. They tried this in Nevada. They actually tried, the state legislature passed a plan and asked the HMOs to take the public money and to provide a prescription drug benefit. And the HMOs opted out of it because it's just not profitable to pool the risk of prescription drugs, especially in the unpredictability of the prescription drugs are in right now. The costs are going up 40% per year. And so no one who's trying to make a profit is going to pool that risk. And so I think that how you do the issues on the critical details of whether the prescription drug goes through Medicare, whether it goes to the HMO, and how do we address this issue that you raised, which is more specifically how can someone afford the deductible? And I think that those questions have not been fully answered. But I think that the first step is doing it through a co-payment system, like you said, so that there is a personal investment that you make, and it's not a complete government handout. But at the same time, it has to be done urgently because of the sort of bigger picture, which is that people weren't expecting when they plan for their retirement. So the rules have changed midstream, and I think it's only fair that we adjust the way we deliver our promises in a way that meets the new system.
Mr. Congressman DeBee, I sincerely hope. I'd like to take you back to campaign finance reform for a moment. It's apparent that there's limitations on the money that can be spent in the campaigns, even though it's immensely bigger every year because of the justice system. And it's apparent, too, that restricting disclosure doesn't get very far because, as you've been saying and others are saying, nobody pays any attention to that. And I wonder whether you've had an opportunity to look overseas at some of the ways they do it, particularly in Europe. For instance, and of course, Britain is a much smaller country than ours, and it may not fit, but they do have a system where all members of Parliament or all members seeking Parliament can run a 60-day campaign instead of a 2-year campaign. And in that time, each is guaranteed a limited number of hours of TV time. They can't buy any more and they can't be given any more. And they must present themselves or some substitute for themselves talking about their qualifications and their program rather than to have the kind of advertising we have. In France, for instance, there's no campaigning allowed in the last week before the election. And there are a series of other things. And I wonder whether we shouldn't start looking abroad to see if we can learn a way to avoid working on money, which we're getting nowhere with, and on disclosure, which isn't helping. If we cut down the amount of time of campaigning from 2 years to 60 days or even 6 months, we'll save a lot of money and a lot of trouble.
I think that I'm not particularly familiar with this system, so I'll just take it for the way it was described. I think it's a fascinating idea, especially on the 60 days and the equalization of the TV time. A couple of things I wouldn't agree with is sort of limiting the campaign schedule to 60 days or any particular limit other than the TV part of it. Because, for me, being able to go to the fish fries back in the spring and to keep knocking on doors and do this sort of retail politics door to door is something that I don't believe for free speech purposes should or can be confined to a time limit. I think that because the public airways are public airways, there's more of a proper and appropriate ability to regulate that in a way that would allow more fairness between the candidates and between the discrepancies between money. But I do believe that in that sense, and of course, since now the vast majority of voters get most of their information from television, I think that it would go a long way to solve a lot of these problems, especially the money end of the problem, because going to the fish fries or to the bingos or the church festivals doesn't cost us any money. So I wouldn't agree with closing down or confining a political season to a particular time, because I think there's free speech problems as well as there are problems to a challenger being able to try to make up a lot of ground of unknownness and to make personal connections with people. But I think that experimenting with some of these other ideas would be fascinating.
Congressman Cranley, being a novice to politics, I'd like to ask you about the role that you think religion plays. We've recently seen Governor Bush talk about Christ as a philosopher, and Senator Lieberman is burning up the trail a little bit with some of his own religious convictions. And you've mentioned in a few of the articles I've read you in George and the New York Times, and as well as a few other national media outlets, that religion has played a major role in why you've come to get into politics. And I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, being that, you know, the whole issue of church and state sometimes is somewhat thorny. And, you know, we really haven't heard much of, I forget your opponent's name, his religious convictions. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about where you see religion and the role it plays in public discourse.
Thank you for your question, Councilman Simperman. Well, the first thing, and this has come up a number of times, especially given Senator Lieberman's use of religious discourse in the public sphere. And I had this question, actually, a similar question at my debate with Congressman Shabbat a week ago. And the first thing I want to say, and the question sort of was, you know, is it wrong, you know, or should we be concerned that for 20 years that we sort of criticized Christian Coalition and said that that was inappropriate? And isn't it a double standard not to say it's inappropriate for Senator Lehman to do it? And I took the opposite approach and said, no, I can't wait for Jerry Falwell to get back into the mainstream Republican Party. You know, I think that would be a very positive development. and my general feelings on the subject are that if we want an honest discourse, if people are willing to talk openly about their religious convictions, if they truly are the source of their commitments publicly, then you have, as a voter, a more honest assessment of what is really going on. And I think it's a matter of free speech. I mean, I certainly think maybe from a political strategy point of view, you can turn off a lot of people, and you should turn off a lot of people if you're trying to impose your religious views on others. But from just the sheer incidence of making religious references in the speech making, I think, one, I think it's protected by free speech, and two, it's helpful to voters, I think, in a way that Jerry Falwell does very explicitly, and in my opinion, in a scary way, and in a way that I strongly disagree with. But at least we're getting the sort of real deal. You know, we're not worried about masking that sort of moral agenda in some sort of different cloak. We know very honestly and convincingly where he's coming from. And I think that I absolutely believe in a separation of church and state, and believe that it is always wrong to impose particular religious beliefs on non-believers. But having said that, anyone who gets into public life, whether they be an atheist or whether they be a Catholic or a Jew or a Protestant or whatever, you know, will of course be, you know, as I explained in my speech, I was very much influenced by my experience with the Jesuits, and very much influenced to work for social justice for those spiritual and personal reasons. So I think that the motivational link to what gives someone the passion to get up every day and spend 6 hours raising money, I think is often grounded in a sort of deeper spirituality, or hopefully believe in a transcendent reality. But that's just the way I come at it. And for other people, whether you're secular humanists or whether you believe in something else, I think that most people who are in public life have got to have something that drives them.
Mr. Crowley, thanks for your remarks today.
Thanks.
As a member of your generation, I was very heartened to hear your talk about the community activism and the actual work in their neighborhoods that a lot of people my age are doing, and yet they're still not voting. How would you recommend making that connection for folks of my generation, the importance of doing that community work and participating in the political process more formally?
Again, for us, it's just been MTV. No, I'm kidding. I think that the best way to do it is to make the personal connection, to go to the schools, to go to the universities, and to say, please get involved with my campaign. Or if you're really turned off by what I said, I mean, don't say this to him, but have somebody else say it to him, get involved in his opponent's campaign. Because as much as I'd like to believe that people would just sort of latch onto the abstract notion that people should vote because it's good for democracy, I think that politics is still personal, and I think that people will respond to individual politicians and will respond to individual races, and sort of making that one-on-one connection, to sort of building those relationships that I think hint at a bigger society that's bigger than government or bigger than a particular election. So I think you need to take the election and the campaign to the people and to the grade schools, to the high schools, and to the colleges. I think that's the only way it's going to happen.
Today at this City Club Forum, we have been listening to Mr. John Cranley, congressional candidate for Ohio's 1st District and the youngest Democratic candidate in the country running for Congress. Thank you, Mr. Cranley. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
Major funding for the production of the City Club Forum is provided by Nordson Corporation, a world leader in systems that apply adhesives, sealants, and coatings during manufacturing operations to make today's products work better and last longer. Additional support is provided by the Nord Family Foundation.